Hey guys, in this video I really wanted to take a look at some of the ideas of what's going to be going on when we're investigating quantities, and in this particular problem we're dealing with Maria, who is putting together a family photo album, and I'm gonna go ahead and ask you to pause this so that you can go ahead and take a moment to read this. Now that you've read this, Marie's creating this family photo album, and basically what's happening here is remember, a quantity is anything that can be measured. So the first key piece of information is this idea of what's the shape of the photo that she's going to be using, and then the other thing that she's talking about is the length that's going to happen across the bottom of the photo and how tall that photo is. She's also going to be using this idea of a 2-inch border, and then it's also going to be talking about how it runs along the two shorter sides of the photo. And then it also runs across the top of the photo. There's also a 4-inch nameplate, and that's going to run the length of the bottom of the album. So we're going to draw a diagram at the very end here, but let's first focus on identifying these quantities and just kind of writing down what we know about them. So the first thing that we know we're going to have to deal with is we're going to have to deal with the photo height, and we're also going to have to deal with the photo's length. So that's actually two different quantities that we're going to have to be dealing with, and they do have a particular relationship that we'll investigate here in a second. The other thing that we know that we're going to be dealing with is this 2-inch border. So we know that we're going to be dealing with the border in actually two different places. We're going to be dealing with the border on the sides, and we're going to be dealing with its width, and we're also going to be dealing with its height. Or I'm going to not say height so much as I'm going to say length, because if you think about it, when you deal with border, border has a width, and then when you unroll a border and put it around something, you're actually measuring out how long the border is. So we're going to call that length. And then if we think about the overall nameplate, the nameplate is actually going to come into play here, but when we're talking about the nameplate, we're going to be talking about the nameplate's length. Would help if I spelled length correctly there. And we're also going to talk about the nameplate's height. So if we look at what quantities we definitely can identify easily here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different quantities. The next thing that I would highly recommend is when you're going through and looking at these quantities, check to see if they're what's called a fixed quantity or a variable quantity. So if we think about this photo right here, we don't know what the height or the length is, so we definitely know that these are variable quantities. So maybe somewhere off to the side, what you might want to do is just write a little note to yourself and say that these are going to be variable quantities. So this is a variable quantity, and this is a variable quantity. Now the border that's going to be going on the sides, we know that that border that goes on the side is actually going to be a fixed quantity, because we know that it's 2 inches wide. But the length that's going to be on the side for the border is a variable, because we don't know how long the sides of the photo are. That nameplate, that's going to run across the entire bottom part of the album. Well, if you think about it, the bottom part of the album is going to have to be in relationship to the entire photo that's on the album. Well, since we don't know how much the photo is in terms of a fixed or variable, this also has to be a variable. And then in terms of the height, we know that the nameplate could be fixed. And some people might get confused as to which one of these should be fixed and variable, but when we draw the diagram, it's going to be very, very clear. Also, looking at our quantities here, I noticed that I talked about the bordered sides, but if we look back up here in the word problem, I see that I have the two shorter sides of the photo, and then I completely forgot the top of the photo. So we're also going to have to remember that when we do a drawing, there's actually going to be 2 additional quantities for the border on the top of the photo. So I might want to just go ahead and make a quick note to myself right here of we also need to deal with border at the top, and it's going to have a width as well and a length. So now that I know all of these different quantities, what we now want to look at is what are the values of any fixed borders or fixed quantities. So in this case, the width of the border has a fixed magnitude of 2, but then you also want to remember to include your inches as a unit, because what we want to make sure is anything that's being measured always has an agreed upon unit. So in this case, the border sides have a width of 2 inches. Well, looking at this, I can also see that the nameplate, which runs the entire length, is going to be a 4-inch nameplate. Well, the nameplate, if you think about it, will be kind of like a rectangle. So if you think about it, the height is really going to be what we're looking at as our fixed quantity there, and it's going to be 4 inches. And then our border that goes across the top, if we think about the top right here would definitely be a fixed. So we're going to say that that's fixed. And it's also going to be fixed at 2 inches. And it really helps when you draw the diagram, if this doesn't make sense, to think about drawing it out first as a general template here. So if you think about it, what's happening here is we know that we have a photo. So here's our photo. And then there's going to be some kind of a border that goes around the top and along the sides. Well, we know that this border right here is going to go across the top, just like this. And we know that it's also going to go along the 2 sides of the photo. So if we think about it, it's going to look something like this. And then you're going to get the same thing over here. So just kind of coloring that in real quick. But the problem is that we also need to worry about this whole little negative part right here, because a border has to go in here as well. So I'm going to have to make it a point to look at that. And then we know that the nameplate is going to go down here on the bottom. So I'm going to put the nameplate down here. So this is the name. And now we need to start worrying about, well, what's the relationship with all of this? Well, the first thing that I want to look at is this nameplate. I know that the nameplate is going to be 4 inches in height. And then this length right here, we don't really know what that is. We'll get to that here in a second. I know that in the orange parts right here, and I'm going to change to a fairly bright color here that you'll be able to see against the orange here. We know that in this direction right here, from here to here, that's going to be 2 inches. We also know that from here to here is also 2 inches. And from here to here is 2 inches. Well, that means that also these little squares that you see right here, and I'm going to highlight them, which make up the corners of the border, are actually 2 inches high by 2 inches wide, because they have to be the same dimensions as this right here. So this right here is really 2 inches by 2 inches, which means that this little corner right here is also 2 inches by 2 inches. Well, there's a lot going on in this diagram, but really, if you look at this, everything has a label with the exception of the photo right here in black. So let's actually examine what that's going to look like when we come over here and kind of view it off to the side. So we know that the photo over here has a relationship, and if we look up at the word problem, it says that the photo is twice as long across the bottom as it is tall. So when we look at the bottom, it says that as the height here it's tall. The bottom right here says that it has to be twice as long, so it's 2 times however tall the photo is. So what that's telling us is that really this bottom piece right here depends on how tall the photo is. So with these variables that we see up here, what we actually find is that ultimately this particular height is the independent variable. And we can say that that right there is going to be, we'll say, t. And then the length right here is the dependent variable, because that's what's on the bottom, so that's the dependent variable. And they already tell you that they want you to let x represent the length across the bottom of the photo, so this is actually going to be x. So the problem here now is that we know that this right here, how tall it was really t, and that this right here is really x. Well, we know that the bottom right here is related to t, so wherever I see tall, because tall really is t right here, we can actually put together a representation for what x would look like. What x is going to look like is x is going to be equal to 2 times t. And we're going to put all this together and kind of take a look at what that looks like here in a second. So what this is telling us is that along the bottom right here, that when we look at the photo, we see x right here. And then when we look at the side right here along the photo, the question is well, what's the relationship there? Well, we said that we're just going to call that t, whatever that is. Well, the problem now wants us to try and put all this together and look at the area. So if we had to piece all of this area together, what we can look at is the area of each of these little blocks that we've made. So if we look at this, the photo up here, if we draw it into different regions, is going to have one corner right here, then a piece of border. It's going to have another corner right here, a piece of border on the side. It's going to have a border on the side right here, and then it's going to have the nameplate right here with the photo in the center. So if we look at the photo, we know that the photo is a rectangle that's x across and t high. So we know that we could just call that xt for its area. Right here, we know that this side panel right here is 2 inches wide, and its other side is t, so I know that this particular piece right here is going to be 2 times t. Well, that side also is going to match up with this side, so this side is also 2t. The top right here, where we have the top border, is 2 inches across, and its side right here matches up with the x that you see down here across the bottom. So this area is going to be 2x. And then these little corner pieces right here, if you look at them, we already said that they were 2 by 2. So when we look at these right here are actually going to be a number of 4 inches squared. And then when we look across the bottom, you see that this is a 4-inch piece, and then going all the way across, we know that we have to cover the photo, which is x, and then we also have to cover this piece of the border and this piece of the border. So really, this is going to be x plus 2 from the border plus 2 from the border for a total right here of x plus 4 inches. Now that I have all the pieces individually written down for their area, I'm going to have to put them all together. So what I'm actually going to do is pause the video here and piece them all together, and then when we come back, I'll explain how I got my entire expression. So after going through each of the sections and adding them all together, what you want to look at here is this idea that the overall adding together is going to be constant terms with constant terms, and then collect any variable terms that have similar variables. So in this case, we can definitely add the 2 corner pieces together. So 4 plus 4 is going to be 8 plus, and then I see that my top piece here has an x component in it, and this bottom piece here has an x component in it. And remember, you don't need parentheses when you're doing addition. So this 2x plus x right here is just going to give me a total of 3x. And then I'm going to have this plus 4 right here from the bottom piece. Looking at the right side and the left side, those both have a t in common, so I can just add those together and say that that's 4t. And then still looking, I can reduce this again and say that 8 plus 4 is 12 plus 3x plus 4t. And then from looking at everything that we've measured, everything here is going to be measured in inches squared, because ultimately what happened is when we set up all of our quantities here in the very beginning, we started measuring everything in terms of inches. So remember, when you multiply units together, inches times inches will give you inches squared. One exercise that I'm going to leave for you to do is to take this down to one final step and change this t into the variable x. You should be able to do that just simply by looking at this expression up here, x equals 2t. Good luck, and I look forward to seeing you guys in class. Bye.